The ballots have been counted, and now the suspense begins. Hello, everyone. I'm François Picard. We are in Berlin with Deutsche Welle for a special edition of the France 24 debate. Deutsche Welle's Melinda Crane is with us. Great to see you in the flesh. Melinda, it's the day after Election Day in Germany. It's when all the hard bargaining begins for coalition building. We're going to get into all that with you and our guests. It's also day one for Angela Merkel after 16 years as caretaker chancellor of Germany.
Absolutely, and that represents a shift to a new epoch. 16 years is a very long time, but the Merkel epoch is ending. She will be in power until a new government's in place. But the fact is, this is a watershed not only because Angela Merkel is taking her leave, but also because we're seeing fundamental changes in the political landscape. And as fragmented as this result is, it is nonetheless a true turning point for Germany. We have two parties that have long been big tent parties, the Chancellor Merkel's Conservatives and also the Social Democrats. Now, the Social Democrats have been seeing their numbers shrink continually ever since the 2010s and the Hearts for social welfare reforms that they put through back then. But the CDU remained a big tent party until now. Last night, we saw a major migration away from the CDU because the Merkel era is ending. It was an era in which the boundaries between left and right became blurred. She moved her party more and more toward the center. There were many people who voted for her party because of her. Now we're seeing the chancellor candidate, Armin Laschet, took the party back toward the right. He announced a team that included a party stalwart, old school, very market-friendly, Friedrich Merz. I think many people who voted for the CDU under Merkel have taken their leave. They've moved to the SPD and the Greens, and therefore we're seeing a real change also in the landscape in terms of a new tension between left and right and a new and fundamental question about how much state, how much market. And those issues will dominate the upcoming coalition discussions. So a real change now in Germany's political positioning.
Yeah, and the argument over the issues, they complained it wasn't enough during the campaign. It really is going to begin now, Melinda. As we can see, when they sit down for that hard bargaining, Olivia Salazar-Winspear has more.
Sharing power three ways, Germany could be headed for an unprecedented political scenario. Emerging just slightly ahead of the CDU, the centre-left SPD put their victory down to a desire for change after 16 years of centre-right government, while recognising that two other parties, the Greens and the liberal FDP, are now the kingmakers.
The voters have very clearly spoken. They strengthened three parties, the Social Democrats, Greens and FDP. And therefore, that's the clear mandate that the citizens of this country have given. These three should form the next governments.
But the question is, how? Power could be shared in what's been called a traffic light configuration, with the Social Democrats joined by the FDP party and the Greens. Another potential setup would reflect the colours of the Jamaican flag, with the CDU this time teaming up with those same junior partners. It's now up to the parties to negotiate and strike a deal. The Greens and the pro-business FDP are getting round the table immediately.
The parties that have most wanted to move away from the status quo of the Grand Coalition in recent years were the Greens and the FDP. And that is why it makes sense for these two to first seek talks with each other to see whether, despite all our differences, we could become a progressive centre of a new coalition.
Those differences include the €500 billion ecological investment plan the Greens are calling for. The FDP's not in favour, and nor do they share the SPD's views on a number of budget issues, including raising income taxes. Key issues that could make or break these alliances. Yet one thing they all share is a pro-European stance, something saluted by French Secretary of State for Europe, Clément Beaune, who praised Germany's commitment to moderation, stability and continuity as Paris looks ahead to the next chapter of neighbourly relations with Berlin.
And indeed, all of Europe is going to be watching which direction Germany takes. With us now, member of the Bundestag. She sits in the house behind us. Elisabeth Kaiser is with us from the Social Democratic Party. Before we talk about what's ahead, let's take a moment here to say congratulations. Not too many people can boast that they are re-elected at the age of 34.
Thank you very much.
It was a tough campaign?
Yes, it was quite tough because I'm from Thuringia and we have like a high AfD results there, so it was not as easy, but the overall success of the SPD was also recognizable in Thuringia. Yeah.
You improved on your score. This is in the Thuringia, in the former East Germany, and you improved on your score there, the SDP.
Yes, I doubled my results to 2017.
Why?
So yeah, I mean, I make hard work there. I did a lot of talks with the people there. I were around. I was really present. I try to be there every minute when I'm not in the Bundestag. So it's really important to be in your constituency, to be there for your people, to hear what they say, and I think this helps a lot.
What was the big issue?
I mean, biggest issues were also social politics, so the pensions, for example, also the pay gap we have between East and West, still a pay gap recognizable. So for people in East Germany, they don't want to feel left behind. So this is a quite big issue. So we have to make politics where the eastern part of Germany gets more aware. So it's more in the focus of politics.
And this is key, isn't it? Because we're coming out of COVID, and the issue of inequality and of those whose livelihoods were hit hardest was, of course, front and center throughout Europe. Now comes coalition building, and we're beginning to come out of COVID, and some are saying, let's go back to being fiscal hawks in Germany, and others are saying, no, let's continue on the road of the welfare state taking more of a role. And when you build a coalition, it's going to be difficult for that.
Yeah, it would be, especially when we want to have like a traffic-like coalition with the Liberal Party. So we will see.
Yeah, just to remind our viewers, traffic light again. That's the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberals who their standard bearer color is yellow.
Yes,
yeah.
And I mean they are still like free market, and they don't want to have the state involved in all the issues people are concerned with. And we are saying the market doesn't work always good. So we want to have a strong social welfare state, and we still want to have a good infrastructure, and the state has to do its work there because the market failed there, especially when you see it public transport, for example. It was economicized, so we miss public transport in the landscape, and it's
okay,
really
so
hard
practically
issue.
speaking here, we were at SPD headquarters on Sunday night watching the electric turns. We spoke with the Prime Minister of Lower Saxony, and we put the question to him, because you have enshrined in the Constitution fiscal purity. Once COVID is over, you're supposed to go back to a balanced budget at the federal level.
Yeah, and nobody wants to touch this. Nobody wants to touch the Constitution.
And do you want to touch it, Elisabeth?
We don't have to, because we don't have to speak about the black zero we talk about in Germany. It's like when you have to make debt. And it's still possible for a state.
So how do you afford social spending?
We have to get more money from the rich people. It's still that. I mean, we have 5% of the people in Germany who have the half amount of the wealth in Germany. So I think it's possible that they give something for infrastructure, for public goods. I think this is quite important to finance all the things we need today, and we have to invest in our infrastructure, in education, for example, because it's so important for all of us.
What does the youth wing of the party think about Olaf Scholz, 63 years old? He has been dubbed the Scholzomat for being a little bit boring at times. Finance minister who's more of a fiscal hawk, if anything. What do they think of him?
I mean, yeah, I must admit that young people, for Olaf Scholz, for young people, is not the big inspiration guy. I mean, it's not, but he is a man who showed that he can manage crisis very good, that he is experienced in what he's doing, and he gives a little bit like stability. I mean, he stands for stability, and he has a kind of humor not everybody knows about. He's like a little bit, how I say, dry humor, I would say, and I think he could be also funny when you know him. So in the public, he's more like discreet and very correct, but he can also be very empathetic. And yeah.
One final question for you: for all of your adult life, you've only known one chancellor of Germany, and it's going to be now different. You've suffered setbacks in the past. You were 20% last time in the 2017 election. How does it feel this time? When you think back to 2 months ago, just 2 months ago when you were that low in the polls, did you think that you'd have the most votes?
To be honest, no. I didn't think that. I was a little bit devastated because all elections, I'm like an active member. I know we dropped in the elections, and it's the first time we win the elections. And for me, it's a really good feeling, and I'm really excited about it.
All right. Best of luck to you, Elisabeth Kaiser. Once again, congratulations on your
re-election.
Thank you very
much.
And you hear Elisabeth Kaiser saying, for once we win. Well, Armin Laschet has not conceded defeat, the head of the Christian Democrats. And he was speaking this Monday. He seems to think he still has a look in to eventually building a coalition.
Der Bundesvorstand, das Präsidium.
The Federal Board of the CDU Executive Committee is in agreement that we are prepared to enter into talks for a Jamaica coalition. The people who voted for CDU-CSU want us to take responsibility and govern, and we are convinced that a government under the leadership of the Union is the best thing for Germany, and we have a responsibility to these voters.
And we're pleased at this moment to welcome Sebastian Haas from the CDU party. A member of the CDU, you've been active in the CDU, both locally here in Berlin and at the national level. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Good evening.
You just heard Armin Laschet saying that we are prepared to form, if need be, a coalition with the Greens and the Liberal Democrats, a so-called Jamaica coalition. Is he serious?
Well, we have Jamaica coalitions on the federal state level. The CDU has coalitions with the Liberals in North Rhine-Westphalia, where Armin Laschet is head of this federal state. We have coalitions with the Greens in Baden-Württemberg. We are getting very well along with both parties, and we even have a Jamaica coalition in Schleswig-Holstein in northern part of Germany. What I think is important...
But is it, I mean, this was, Olaf Scholz took a dig this Monday at Armin Laschet, saying, how can you pretend to be the one to have a mandate when you've just suffered the worst defeat of your party since World War II?
Well, yesterday's results have been painful. There's no doubt about that. And we'll have a very close look in that. Not only on the level of the executive boards of the party, but also with our party members, with the 400,000 party members all across Germany. The political system in Germany, nonetheless, is not built that way that only the winner, the one who comes out first of an election, is allowed to lead coalition talks, to negotiate with other parties. What is important in the German political system is to be able to build a strong and reliable coalition in that house that gives you a majority and build a coalition contract that's working for 4 years. And nothing should prevent us talking among democratic parties in order to see if we can find political lines that brings us together to build a coalition for the next 4 years.
Okay, so leaving the door open, you heard Melinda Crane at the beginning of our show say, and we just talked about it with Elizabeth Kaiser of the SPD. 4 years ago, it was the SDP suffering their worst ever score. Now it's the CDU suffering its worst ever score. Is it the end of the Big Tent party when you see where all those votes have gone?
I think that we're observing, and the analysis will have to be done on the short, medium, and long term. But there's something happening. I think that political voting is getting more diverse. That the party system offers an option for any kind of political vote, and that the time where one big party or two big parties catched up nearly 80% of the votes, that's indeed part of history.
And which way do you think that your party should go? Because we saw when there was the leadership fight and it was Armin Laschet that came out on top. He's more aligned with Angela Merkel than some of the more hardliners inside of the party. Which direction should the party take?
I think that those who voted for the CDU yesterday want to see the CDU taking responsibility, something that this party has done for the last 75 years. And
But does that mean being the fiscal hawk that if first we support German exports, then we talk about Europe, or is it more the middle of the road that we've seen from the CDU the last two mandates from Angela Merkel, where she agreed on communal borrowing with other EU countries, where she let in the migrants in 2015?
I think that one big privilege and a big chance that we have in Germany is that all parties, center-left, right-left, center-center, are all pro-European parties. Anti-European parties don't have a say in German politics when it comes to forming a government. So with a lot of respect to our political opponents, who are opponents in campaigns, they can be allies afterwards. The Social Democrats, the Greens, the Liberals, all parties from the democratic center stand for a pro-European direction. Now, it's clear that when it comes to fiscality, to debts, to shared debts, positions differ, but that there is a clear pro-European roadmap in the center of this country on the political stand. There's absolutely no doubt in that.
One final question for you. You have a sister party, the CSU in Bavaria. Its leader, Markus Söder, who tacked more to the center, now seems to be going back to being perhaps more conservative, more hardline. Again, is that the trend going to be as well for the CDU?
The story between the history between CDU and our sister in Bavaria is a long one, and indeed, when it comes to who is a little bit more hardliner than the other one, it's mostly our Bavarian sister, who is much more anchored in tradition.
But after Merkel, is the party going to become more hardline?
Oh, the CSU has always.
But the CDU, I'm asking.
I think that what always made the force of the CDU is that it lives with three currents, which is the liberal one, the Christian Democratic one, and the conservative one. And trying to find out an equal stand between these three currents has always made the success of this party. And I really hope that we will get back on track with that again.
All right, Sebastian Haas, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Sebastian Haas saying that you can have coalitions with parties that are different. Well, one of those parties that's different is the Greens, who at one point, for a very short while, were even front runners. Still was no longer the case late in the campaign. Nonetheless, they had their best score ever in a federal election. It's a report by Jean-Emile Jamin.
Party supporters celebrate. As an exit poll suggests, the Greens have secured their best ever result in a German national election.
Wenn man das mit der letzten Wahl vergleicht, dann ist das natürlich ein riesiger Anstieg. Und ich finde, das ist auch ein klares Signal, dass die Bevölkerung Grün möchte. Ja.
Auch wenn wir gestürzt sind, von Anbeginn die hohen Prognosen und jetzt auf diese 15%. Nichtsdestotrotz, glaube ich, können wir sehr glücklich sein.
The party's first ever candidate for Chancellor says the Greens now have a clear mandate to govern.
Wir haben einen Auftrag nicht nur für zukünftige Generationen, sondern man spürt, dieses Land braucht eine Erneuerung, spürt einen richtigen Aufbruch und vor allen Dingen, dieses Land braucht eine Klimaregierung.
Earlier in the campaign, it looked like the elections would provide a historic opportunity for the Greens, as climate change emerged as a key issue following deadly flooding in July. Some observers even suggested that Baerbock might take the chancellery. But support fizzled when she made a series of missteps, and critics sought to portray the Greens as a prohibition party, set to increase the price of petrol, electricity and airline tickets. A recent poll found that while German voters were concerned about the environment, 55% of them were opposed to paying more to protect it. As the third most popular party following Sunday's election, the Greens are now expected to play a kingmaker role in the haggling to form a government. Party members are said to favour a centre-left coalition with the SPD. Its leader, Olaf Scholz, has also made it clear that he has most in common with the Greens. But the Liberal FDP is also waiting in the wings.
Well, to talk about it, we're with Ivy May Müller, member of the Green Party, and I should say as well, member of the Hamburg State Parliament for the Greens. Thank you for joining us. I should also say your age, 24.
Yes.
And so you're from the youth wing of the party. And this is the interesting bit about these German elections, is that there was a split in the vote according to your age. And younger people voted for the Liberals and they voted for the Greens in much greater numbers. Now, we have seen the Greens go up, and as we saw in that report, come down a little during this campaign. And we also have seen with the Greens that now as we enter this crucial phase of coalition building, there is a split between what they call, and we have the same problem in France, by the way, the more ideological ones and the more pragmatic ones. How big a rift is that?
I don't think that it's like at the moment any kind of issue, because I think we have a clear message on these elections, because we have changed so many voters and they are clear we want climate justice, and this is something we know all in the party. It's quite important and we will do so because this is our identity, and we will work for social and climate justice in this country. And I don't think so that this kind of discussion between the more ideology people in the party or the more pragmatic ones is now on the topipic, or like one of the big
Sunday
topics.
night we saw the candidates all speaking as they do on a day after the elections, and we heard the leader of the FDP, of the Liberals, say to the leader of the Greens, hey, let's talk together first before we decide whether we get into bed with either the SPD or the CDU. And Annalena Baerbock, the leader of the Greens, had already reached out to the FDP. Is that a good thing, to speak with the FDP, who don't have the same positions as you at all on things like fiscal policy?
Yeah, totally. In fiscal politics, we are not the same, but I don't think that it's not that it's. I want to say, like, it's a good idea to talk with them because there are now some possibilities, and the FDP is always inside of these coalitions. But there will still be the big coalition. So I think you have to talk with them.
Yeah.
And I would also say we have like a really strong mandate, because it's clear this kind of country don't want any more a politic of the neoliberal politics of the CDU. And so you have to take action on finding coalitions who want to change our society in a climate justice way. And I think that is our mission, and so to be in a brave position is good for the Green Party. Yeah.
So you have nearly 16% of the vote. You have, as you say, a strong mandate.
Yeah.
Yet Christian Lindner, the head of the FDP, says, I want the finance ministry.
yeah, he can say so, but I don't think that this is the main question.
If he gets it, will it work? Will you be able to have a coalition?
I don't know this at the moment. We will have to talk about this, and I don't think that this is the main question we have to talk about, because the main question is the FDP interested in to do real social justice politics? Because I know they are not really interested concerning what they said the last weeks, but they have to be, because the SPD and the Young Greens and also the Greens are really focused to have a climate justice, but also a social justice society here in Germany. And so there they have to make go with us, and then we can talk about the personalities, I think.
What about, we heard the leader of the CDU this Monday say a Jamaica coalition that is involving the Christian Democrats, the Greens, the FDP is still possible. How do the Greens would be okay with being...
No, I just said it's possible because of the numbers, or when you count all of them together.
But your friends, would they go along with that, with having a coalition with the CDU?
What I said before, it's more important to look on the topics, because it's clear. We're on Friday here, in Hamburg, on the climate strike. We are in Germany at all 600,000 people who are fighting on the streets every Friday for real change in this country. And yeah, we need a coalition who's going to this real change, and we will see if it's possible in a Jamaica coalition. But I think social justice, is also a really big topic, and the last weeks the CDU and the FDP didn't show that they are interested in a real social politics.
Doesn't sound like you favor that option, does it? Let me just ask you, because those Fridays for Future demos have been taking place. Greta Thunberg was here last Friday, in fact, in Berlin. There were some all over the country. When you had those big floods this summer, people said it was a watershed moment. And they also say that all of the parties have gotten greener. So what do you have that's different?
I think the people know that we are fighting since we are existing for real climate politics, and you see it also in some statistics, in our programs, our ideas how to change the mobility, or to change the energy economics. It's still that we have the best ideas how to get to the Parisian agreement. So I think the people know that it's our part to make real climate justice. Yeah.
All right, Ivy May Mueller, best of luck to you, and thank you so much for speaking with us on France 24.
Thanks.
And as we heard there, you have the Greens on the one hand as possible kingmakers, and the FDP on the other. The FDP, 2 elections ago, they were on the ropes. Now, with 11.5% of the vote, they're setting their conditions, as we've been saying. Solange Mougin has more.
It's a dream come true for a party that back in 2013 lost all of its parliamentary seats. With over 11% of the vote, Germany's Free Democratic Party, or the FDP, celebrated Sunday night both their 4th-place win and their newfound role, along with the Greens, as the potential kingmakers in a future coalition with Germany's mainstream traditional parties.
This day sends a clear political signal. The centre was strengthened, the political fringes were weakened.
The rise of the fiscally conservative pro-business party is credited in large part to the charisma of its leader, Christian Lindner, and to the party's recent coronavirus stances, voicing concern about the dangers of the virus, but also campaigning hard against infringements on civil liberties and government spending. Throughout the campaign, Lindner expressed a preference for a coalition with the conservative CDU. But after Sunday's tight vote and the left's slim lead, the 42-year-old said talks with the 3rd-place Greens could speed up negotiations.
Friends, the increase in support for the Greens is also remarkable. What unites them and the FDP is that both led an independent election campaign.
But as German papers note, forming a coalition between the Greens and the FDP presents major challenges. They aren't easy bedfellows, with the Greens pushing for higher taxes and greater public spending. While for the FDP, what's essential is curbing spending and cutting taxes. But if they do join forces, they could pick together the next chancellor.
And we're in the company of Sandra Wieser, member of the German parliament. And thanks for joining us here on France 24.
You're welcome.
And congratulations, you're re-elected.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very happy about this.
Yeah, you were, before we go back to talking about whether or not you can do business with the Greens, because we just asked our young guest there a moment ago. Tell me a little bit about the campaign. Your constituency, North Rhine-Westphalia, exactly. Most populous in Germany. It's the industrial heartland. What was the big issue?
Let's say the big issue is economy, or let's say the companies, small and medium companies, they have more and more to do with bureaucracy. They have a lot of taxes to pay. They come out of Corona with a lot of problems, and now we have to, let's say, to unfasten these belts and to push the economy that they get better. And I'm really in it's not an urban region where I'm coming from. It's more or less how do you say, rural. And there we have not rural. It's it's in the green. There are not so much big villages, and therefore there are
small towns.
Small towns, exactly. Yeah. Sorry for looking for the word. And what we have really to do is how we can work now, digital. How can we keep the people in the region and so on? And this is really a big issue, and I think we have a lot to do in Germany, and we really want to reform Germany, and we have some good propositions for this.
So 4 years ago, the FDP didn't make a lot of friends when you had coalition negotiations, and suddenly Christian Lindner said, no, I'm out of here, let's have a snap election. Instead, Germany was forced to go to another grand coalition. This time around, will there be any surprises?
Well, it was not really a surprise 4 years ago, because when you're around the table and everybody has something in his basket and there's only one party who has nothing, then what do? You leave, because it was really, let's say, the negotiations were not so successful for us. And therefore, there was a point where we had to quit the consultation because there was nothing to win.
I ask the question because when you spend weeks and months negotiating a coalition, it's all of Europe that waits on you.
Yeah, this is for sure. It was done a little bit. I think 4 years ago we had also some elections after the Bundestagswahl. It was 4 weeks later. There were other elections in one of the Länder. And therefore, we had kind of a stop for 4 weeks.
But there's always an election in Germany.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. But therefore, it was very long, and you had really the impression that it was long. But at the end, it was quite clear that was nothing to do together. Yeah.
All right, so this time around, let's see if you have something to do together.
We have something to do together.
A novel approach, and it seems as though both the Greens and the FDP agree with this, is in Germany, by the way, just to remind our viewers, you don't have to have a prime minister who tries to form a coalition. Anyone can try to form a coalition. You don't need the president telling the prime minister, you're going to try to form a coalition. That doesn't work that way. Exactly. So you have both the Greens and the FDP saying, let's talk together before we go see those two big tent parties.
Exactly.
Where's the common ground with the Greens?
Or there are a couple of common grounds. Let's say which is liberty rights, human rights. Also, we want to digitalize Germany. We want climate change. I think there are also a big ground where we have a couple of things together. And for the other things, let's say, we have to discuss. Yeah? But I think it's quite interesting to make not the same fault we did 4 years ago, now to go really to the smaller party and say, let's discuss together. And when we go together, we're a little bit stronger, because two small make one big.
The rest of Europe is particularly interested in the FDP is a pro-European party, and so is the Greens. But there's a big difference. The mutualization of debt, unprecedented, that we saw to have these big infrastructure spending plans at the EU level. The FDP much more reluctant to keep that going. For you, that's a one-off?
Yeah, let's say for us it's a one-off to limit the debts in our convention. This is really something where we keep to, that we cannot exceed our debts forever and forever as a respect for further generations. But let's say
what do you say in that case to smaller European nations who need the help of big ones too, in the face of global competition, in the face of Chinese, perhaps a United States that's not as there's a bit more of a fickle friend than before.
Yeah, but therefore we agreed a couple of months to the $750 billion deal, or euro deal, and I think that also shows that we are not completely against something, but you really have good arguments, and you cannot exceed this until forever. So we really have to show what is the effect, and as I said, our next generations, they have to pay back everything we spend today. You know?
All right, one final question for you. The leader of your party, Christian Lindner, has said that he wants to be the finance minister. Is that a red line in any negotiation?
I think it's a big wish, and it makes sense. If you want to, let's say, have the finger on something, he already said this since a couple of months, and let's wait and see. There are three parties around the table, and at the end, it's a common sense
and
of three.
Those three parties, for now, are the SPD, the Greens, and you?
Yeah, or CDU, Greens.
Or
and
CDU.
It depends. I think really everything is open.
Everything's open at this point.
Everything is open.
All right.
It keeps interesting.
Thank you so much, Sandra Wieser. And again, congratulations on your re-election.
Thank you very much.
And let's just once again remind you, if you're just joining us here on France 24, of those results. Melinda Crane was saying a short while ago how there's been a splintering once again of the politics in Germany. The SPD gaining more than 5%. The CDU, according to the provisional tally that came in at 4:30 in the morning, down close to 9%. And then if we look at the makeup of the parliament, we're going to see a record number of seats in the Bundestag next time, which will be putting the SPD with the most. But again, the CDU not that far behind, some 10 seats shy of the SPD. So yeah, anything still is possible. And we're back with Deutsche Welle's Melinda Crane. Melinda, your reaction a little bit to what we've been hearing about coalition talks, people playing their cards close to their chest, of course, on day one, but there has been a lot of posturing already.
Well, people absolutely trying to get into position for these first exploratory talks. We don't even talk about coalition negotiations until the parties have had exploratory talks, and the Greens and Free Democrats are now saying they're going to do pre-exploratory talks with each other, as you mentioned, which is quite interesting. The big question will be, how do they approach that? Do they go in with their party programs, their election platforms, and say, this, and this we have to have? Or do they go in and say, what would we really like to do together, as the last speaker said? What could we do together? With that kind of a positive approach, they might actually be able to find some common ground. Particularly interestingly enough, in the foreign policy area, she talked about human rights as one commonality. Other commonalities are the desire to take a tougher stance against China and Russia. So that could be interesting if they try to work out some agreement there. And then certainly digitalization is an area of commonality between these two smaller parties that they might be able to build on. Climate is where it gets sticky because of investment. You heard your SPD guest saying we're going to have to see massive investment, also public investment, government investment, to get that climate transformation of the economy, but also transport systems, energy systems, and so on. Whereas you heard the FDP guest saying, you know what? We want to keep a brake on public sector debt. So here is where there's going to be some real horse trading.
Yeah, and the idea being you want to... Germany, we think of it as this power that's had this great industrial boom, but part of the calculus in all this is after this coronavirus pandemic, how do you preserve people's jobs and improve on them so that they're not precarious?
And you know what we saw in the coronavirus pandemic? It just laid bare the gaps in so many areas in Germany that had been papered over in the Merkel years. Merkel succeeded with her grand coalition in giving social benefits to different groups within the society, but major areas were ignored and they came to light during the pandemic. And now we've seen Germany's major economic institutes, but also the federal bank, the central bank here, warning that growth is going to be revised downward and for this year.
So wait a minute.
There's urgency here.
More uncertainty, more inequality, and yet let's look at the results from Sunday night. The parties that are the most hardline, that are the most extreme, the AfD to the far right, the Die Linke party on the far left, they didn't fare as well. In fact, Die Linke was a disastrous score. So why did people vote for the center?
Well, I think, you know, we call it the center, but as I said at the outset of the program, in fact, we're seeing a repositioning of the two big centrist parties, further toward the left and further toward the right. This SPD right now is significantly more to the left than the SPD of Gerhard Schröder. And the SPD that we're seeing now under Armin Laschet's leadership is moving significantly toward the right. So I think voters are finding more options in the middle of the spectrum. Nonetheless, there are options that are left or right.
We spent so many months, by the way, Melinda, talking about the AfD. We had those images all throughout Europe that we played on France 24 of the anti-vax protests. They got so much oxygen, and yet the score.
They're not going away, Francois. They are very, very big in the East. Yes, they were in the single digits in most of West Germany, but in East Germany, in two federal states, we've seen the AfD taking the first place in the elections on Sunday with shares of the vote of 25%, respectively. The AfD is more and more becoming an Eastern party, but that doesn't mean you can count them out.
Doesn't mean you can count them out. Two quick questions for you, Melinda Crane, before we go. Question number one. When you hear Armin Laschet saying he's got, he could be able to form the next government after suffering a historic defeat, is he serious?
One major German newspaper said today he's lost his grip on reality. I wouldn't perhaps put it quite that harshly, but the fact is he comes to this from a position of weakness at this point. Personal weakness, he said himself. He was responsible for the debacle on Sunday night.
Yet he hasn't resigned.
But he hasn't resigned, and I don't think we will see him resign anytime soon. But so personal weakness, but also this party lost almost 9% of its vote compared to 4 years ago. The SPD gained. Who do you want to lead the next government? A loser or a winner? The answer seems fairly clear.
And Melinda Crane, we're coming to the end of an era and the start of a new one. We've been talking throughout this hour about the start of that new era, but I'm old enough to remember when 16 years of Helmut Kohl as chancellor ended. Helmut Kohl, who was the leader of Germany during reunification, and it was a big shock when he left. What kind of a shock is it going to be when Angela Merkel eventually does leave at some point in the next weeks or months?
I don't think it will be that kind of a shock, because what we're seeing here, you know, sometimes this election campaign was referred to as boring. In fact, even international press talked about it as being extremely boring. Well, in politics, boring is a sign of stability. Boring is a sign that it's less ideological than pragmatic. And so I think what we're looking at is a number of very pragmatic leaders, all of whom have a pretty urgent drive to govern. And that makes me hopeful that we will see real progress in coalition negotiations. They're talking about getting this done by Christmas. And for good reasons, Francois. As you mentioned, all of Europe is watching this because this is Europe's most powerful economy. This is the EU's biggest member state, and it also is a country that will be taking over the G7 presidency in January. Therefore, we need a strong German government for Europe and I would argue also for international political relations. Therefore, it's incumbent upon these guys to try to find a way to deal.
All right, and it's, again, just day one when it comes to building that coalition that will lead Germany into this next phase. No rest for the weary. I know you've got to get back to the newsroom at Deutsche Welle. Melinda Crane, many thanks for being with us. We want to thank you from all of us here in Berlin for joining us for this special edition of the France 24 debate.